You are now listening to the Hot Take Podcast, brought to you by Full Time Fantasy. Here are your hosts, Stephen Tironi and Josh Daly. Time to make it hot.
Welcome to the show. This is the Hot Take Podcast, and we have a great episode for you today, folks. I'm pretty excited to get into the free agent quarterbacks, and we're going to get into some of the Dynasty stashes as well. We want to talk about some stashes at the running back position that, you might think, okay, maybe he's a dump. I'm not sure if I should hold him at this point. We're going to get into all of that, talk some fantasy football. What is going on? I am Stephen Tironi, joined by my co-host, Josh Daly. What is going on, buddy?
What's going on, my fantasy brother? Just, getting excited. We just had the combine. So, we got some guys, trending upward. Got some guys, stock took a hit. So excited to get into that, talk some free agent QBs, and just ready to dive in, man.
For me, the RB1 and the wide receiver 1 are pretty locked down. Like, I don't see an alternative in my mind, and maybe that can be argued, but for me it's JT, it's Jonathan Taylor, and it's CD Lamb. Point. Are you looking at that any other way right now?
I tend to agree with you. Before the combine, I wouldn't have thought that Taylor was the number one, but after putting up some of the ridiculous numbers that he did, especially with his 40, with him and Saquon being like the only 225 plus guys to run a 4.4, 4.41. Right. Pretty impressive there. Not saying he's the next Saquon, but comparisons have been made, folks.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about some of these guys that have taken big hits and that have come up from the combine. We got to take that combine with a grain of salt, right, Josh? That's how I look at it too. You really have to, think about it from just a holistic perspective as well.
Oh, absolutely. The thing with the combine is, it is what it is. It's just athletic testing. And, right. Granted, there's some one-on-one interviews, which I think that's the main part of the combine, is that these coaches who never had a chance to get in front of these kids, and we have to remember, like, that's kind of what they still are. They're still, young kids, young adults here, and getting in front of them, getting a chance to know them. Of course, some get a sneak peek at the Senior Bowl, like my Lions. Unfortunately, when you're not coaching in the playoffs, you get to do things like that. So, it's just athletic testing. It doesn't take into consideration, like someone's adrenaline or, their anticipation or their confidence or anything like that. And, I think it was Nick Whalen who said, a couple of years ago that, you can't measure all of these things that have to happen in a split-second decision on the football field, and the combine will never be able to do that. It's what's inside that player. And Nick used to coach at the collegiate level, and he mentioned that in most recently, just I think like a month or so ago, he mentioned that he had a guy when he was coaching at Division I level, and there was a receiver that he had there was like a fifth-year senior. And he wanted someone to make him like one of those wristbands with all the plays and like what he's supposed to do. And he said, that's something that you're never going to know if you're just drafting a guy because he runs a 4.33, so it's right. That's the kind of stuff that you can't really judge, like what's between the ears. So it's exciting, man, to get some of these results in, but at the same time, huge grain of salt.
100%. And I think, we're going to get into some of those guys that, maybe the combine doesn't measure what they really have inside. You look at somebody like a Frank Gore, right, who just, you can't measure what this man can do to his body, condition his body and his mind in order to take the beating he has over the years and be relevant in the NFL. But that kind of leads me into, talking about Frank Gore and the Miami situation. We said it last week, actually, on the Hot Take, that Frank Gore could make a retirement tour back to Miami. He went 1 year, he could be back. But if he's not, one of my Dynasty stashes, and even if he comes back for that last year, we don't know how long he's going to play Myles Gaskin is somebody who I liked coming out of last year. Now, he dropped in the draft. He was a 7th-round pick. And that has big weight on what you should consider when you're looking at a player. Like, if you're huge on a player and they don't get drafted, or they get drafted in the 7th round, you kind of have to alter how you look at that player. If he gets another shot, that's one thing. He gets on a team where you can see a path. And that's kind of what I see right now, is a path to the starting role for Myles Gaskin. I mean, we look at this Miami roster right now, Josh. Kalen Ballage didn't do anything for himself for Miami to think that he's a starting running back.
Right. I mean, if you're high on Gaskin, and that makes two of us, because I'll be honest with you, man, when we were going to cover this last week, and you had just kind of beat me to the show sheet, because this is a guy I'm high on too, man. Number one pick as well. And, and you just mentioned the depth chart, like even going into preseason last year, I mean, they had, who was it? Mark Walton, who's just like a domestic violence hound, and
right,
he's probably never going to be back in the NFL again. And then
that was a sad story, because I felt like he had a little bit of wiggle, but
yeah, and it's it is unfortunate, but at the same time, it's like it was just him and Ballage, and you had Drake getting traded, and then Ballage. We basically got to see him, and if you're someone like us that plays Dynasty, you kind of wanted to see Gaskin be subdued for a little while, because the cat's not quite out of the bag yet. You know what I mean? That's right. He's still kind of a secret, and that's why I think he makes a good Dynasty stash. And I think he's a great choice, man. I mean, those of us who played preseason DFS, some of us degenerates, we remember Myles Gaskin. He made Daddy some money last year, so yeah. we're happy with him. So
exactly, and like there's a lot of you can look into the preseason sometimes and get some of these players and really understand that these guys have talent. Like you look at like playerprofiler.com, and I use this as a resource often. I have in my early days with Fantrax. Because it's a resource that you can use just to get a quick, like, okay, what did they do at the combine? What are they looking at, like compared to their college dominator, all that stuff. And they always have the best comparable, right? So the best comparable for Myles Gaskin, according to playerprofile.com, is Ronald Jones. I disagree with that. I really disagree that he is Ronald Jones. If you look at Myles Gaskin, what he is, first of all, he's 2 inches shorter than Ronald Jones. So he is more of a scat back, right? Ronald Jones is just, he's going linear. He's a linear runner. I think that Gaskin is a lot more athletic, and I really think that he can catch the ball out of the backfield, and that's huge when you're talking about fantasy football, because especially with a team like the Dolphins, who you have to assume, like, what if Fitzpatrick is back? If Fitzpatrick gives you a year and that Myles Gaskin can play 8 games, oh, you're loving having Myles Gaskin on your dynasty team.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, with those guys being down for a negative game script most of the time, I would imagine this rebuild's probably going to take a while. So it's it's nice to have a guy like that in your backfield that can catch the rock.
So let's talk about your guys. Now I see you added another guy in here. So let's talk about the first one.
Yeah. So this is what happens when you beat me to the show sheet, man. I just, Myles Gaskin's like definitely when you said dynasty stash, I mean, he's the first guy that popped into mind. But I had to think about these, and honestly, I didn't know who I wanted to talk about more or less, I should say. But it's kind of like the same situation for both guys. But in Minnesota, Mike Boone. I know there's a ton of guys that are out there that like Mike Boone. And it's not necessarily that I'm like super high on Boone, but I do think he makes a good stash just because of the 2 guys in front of him. I like Alexander Madison as well, one of my favorite running backs, in the class coming out last year from Boise State. But at the same time, he went down as soon as it was his turn. He got his shot, and he was injured as well. And Dalvin Cook is just not a guy that I think that you can rely on to carry any sort of significant workload. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're going to, any of these injury websites, Inside Injuries, whatever you rely on. I mean, whoever your trusted source is for injury information. I mean, Dalvin Cook is just so highly rated, or I should say lowly rated, for his propensity to get injured again and his probability to get injured again. I mean, just such a long track record of injuries with Cook. And I mean, if this is the case and he go down, early in the season, like he did, say in 2018, and it's just Madison and Boone, well, then it's a two-man show. And you never know when one of those guys could, we always hear coaches, they're going to give it to the guy that rides the hot hand. The Niners rode that all the way to the Super Bowl last year.
Exactly.
So you never know, man. I feel like he has a lot of potential for the cost that you can get him right now. If you're not a Mike Boone owner, he's going to be super cheap to acquire. But yeah, and then the other guy that I was thinking of is kind of a guy whose stock will increase here. I mean, as you and I record this, of course, we're just coming off of the combine. The draft is still 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks away, and it's pretty imminent. It sounds like from multiple directions that Devontae Freeman is going to get the axe here soon in Atlanta.
Yeah, he's gone. It seems like, man. Like, it seemed like a done deal.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that contract and just kind of the production, and the same thing with Freeman as Cook, they just can't stay healthy. Freeman really kind of early on in his career reminded me of Frank Gore. Those guys are just kind of like football robots that just they just seem to always be able to dart into that hole at the right time. And I personally love Devontae Freeman, but the writing is on the wall, man. So it definitely sounds like he is out. And I mean, there's not much standing between Brian Hill and a starting role, but I do expect the Falcons to draft someone here out of this 2020 class. So, I mean, for the time being, you could hang on to Brian Hill, but I think that window for him to have some value is probably going to be small, and it's probably going to shut pretty quick.
Yeah, so Kadri Olesen, who's more of, the goal line guy, Ito Smith, who – I'm not really sold on. I think that a lot of people have looked at Ito Smith to be, the kind of guy, and I think of everyone, if Ito Smith is back, now I'm not sure of his situation right now, but if Ito Smith is back next year, I would say he's the favorite. If it was Brian Hill and Ito Smith gets a chance, I think Ito would win that job. Kenyon Barner, who's always been a special teams guy.
From what I've seen from like Brian Hill is, he had a good game. Then he had kind of a chance in the featured role once they put Ito Smith on IR, and he really didn't produce that well. I think he kind of let some people down, to be totally honest with you. I know a lot of people kind of emptied their fab clips on Brian Hill last year, trying to get a couple weeks of lightning in a bottle. But it's going to be interesting, because I just think that no matter how you feel about this backfield at the time being, it's probably not going to matter here in a few weeks, because I do think they are going to invest some draft capital in one of these upper tier backs here coming out.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think whoever they draft is someone you really have to look at. And, if they use a third-round pick on a running back, that's somebody you have to look at as, okay, this is probably the guy that they're trying to build around, and if they can go into an offseason with that being the mindset, then he really has to be someone on everyone's radar, because he would win the starting job right away. I think that Brian Hill, like you said, he disappointed last year, and the jury isn't out completely on Brian Hill. I think that, he is an athletic player. He's a good player, but, if he can't thrive in this Atlanta offense, then that's questionable, right? You have to look at that and be
right.
Because you got to be able to produce in that kind of offense. And we've seen players like Tevin Coleman have problems in that offense too. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, I think that that's a great situation to monitor. So big news coming out of Los Angeles: Austin Eckler signed a 4-year, $24.5 million contract today. And, this is off of what looks to be Melvin Gordon's final days. This could be the final offseason of Melvin Gordon with the Chargers. Just don't know at this point, but it looks like the writing kind of on the wall here for Austin Eckler. He could be the starting running back going into 2020, which is very exciting. if you're an Austin Eckler Dynasty owner. It hasn't been decided yet, but a lot of changes are going to be going on in LA. And we were talking off air, Josh, getting into these quarterbacks now. I mean, Tom Brady is somebody who is being mentioned for every team, like we talked about. But the one thing that makes me think that Brady could come to LA is the new stadium. The new stadium in Inglewood, the City of Champions. I really think that's what the Chargers are going to want to do so desperately, is to bring in somebody like Brady to bring in the fans. They have a 24-year-old athletic monster in Austin Eckler, and this guy can do it all. And we've seen it, like you said off air, he was a top 5 running back last season. And, of course, that was mainly without Melvin Gordon, but that's great. We saw him without Melvin Gordon. And so if you can't get it through your head at this point, Austin Eckler can be an RB1. Now let's talk about this Charger situation, Josh. Phillip Rivers is out the door. Let's start there with Phillip Rivers, and then let's talk more about the Charger situation, kind of with Eckler being, around that, talking about what that could mean for him potentially. But let's talk about Phillip Rivers. What do you think makes sense for him right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. We know he's gone. He sold his home in California. I mean, that's pretty much as done as a deal can get.
Right.
And, each side has basically made, parting comments. So, I mean, he's out. We know this. Everybody, including Melvin Gordon, who you just mentioned, everybody seems to think that the most perfect fit for Phillip Rivers would be the Colts. And I can definitely understand that. And I see why they would say that, because that is a win now team. They have a fantastic offensive line, in my opinion, the best offensive line in football. And really, that's the one thing I feel like Phillip Rivers has always lacked. I mean, the Chargers have always had like a minimum of 3 guys on the IR by like week 4 along the offensive line, it seems like, ever since he's been drafted. So I'm sure that would appeal to him personally. But at the same time, I definitely could see, Bruce Arians taking a shot on Phillip Rivers, kind of like, the Carson Palmer, the second life of Carson Palmer in the desert. So,
no, I got to tell you, I would be super disappointed if he was the starting quarterback for the Buccaneers. I would love to see a resurgence for Phillip Rivers in Tampa, but I would hate to be, wanting a Chris Godwin touchdown and just having to rely on Phillip Rivers in what we saw last year. That would be a painful show.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree, but it's enticing for 2 different reasons. The Colts, they don't quite have as many weapons. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like last week we talked about how perfect an OJ Howard for David Johnson trade would be. Personally, if they make that trade, and like I'm on the side, like, why hasn't that deal been made yet? But I get it. Things have to happen in their own due time. But if you do give Rivers a pass catching running back like that, I mean, that's why Eckler excelled so much. Rivers is not afraid to throw it to the running back, even before the days of Eckler. He made Danny Woodhead a thing. And, it's just something where Rivers is going to shot put it to whoever's open. And a lot of times he'll dump it off down low. So that's very appealing to me for that reason. Whereas, if he did go to Indy, I could definitely understand the appeal with the offensive line. It's just that I'm not a huge fan of some of those weapons around him. No matter what you think about, Eric Ebron, but, we know T.Y. Hilton's talented, and, Jack Doyle's very reliable as well. But it's 2 different places, 2 different reasons. But I mean, honestly, I understand the Colts talk. But I think they probably are the front runner at this point, and I think the Bucs would probably be like a close second.
I'm trying to envision Phillip Rivers, and I think that the best point here for Phillip Rivers and the Colts is the offensive line. It's a great line, and what is Rivers going to do? They're going to play it safe with him. They're not going to make him try to kill you with the pass. So for all-around fantasy, I think it's okay. Like, I think it works for Marlon Mack a lot. I think Nyheim Hines is very interesting if Phillip Rivers is the Colts quarterback. somebody that we've been wanting to break out a little bit more. I think Hines has more of a role, as we saw for, a couple of years here with Phillip Rivers and Austin Eckler. Really, I mean, you could go back to LT and then looking at Melvin Gordon, what he's done with him peppering targets. I mean, these are pretty good running backs we're talking about here. So, but still, I really like that kind of role for him. Yeah, I think that's probably the best place. And if he goes to Tampa, I'm just going to be super disappointed. You're just going to find me like with my hand over my face. Just give me that face palm gif, whatever you want. Just type in that, and that's me. If that happens.
I'll have the Captain Jean-Luc Picard queued up, ready.
I mean, really, and before we go into Jameis Winston and Tampa Bay, I do think that Tyrod Taylor in Los Angeles makes a lot of sense. He's already there. He's about to make $5 million in 2020. I really think that he's getting paid as if like they value him that much. They're going to let him compete for a job unless they bring in Brady and it's a done deal. But then it's Tyrod Taylor. So let's talk about that real quick for the Chargers. I mean, I like that offense with Tyrod Taylor back there. I mean, they have the talent there with Keenan Allen. Throw it up to Mike Williams, and all of a sudden Austin Eckler, I think, is in a fine situation. And I think there are a lot of naysayers out there that are, saying that couldn't work. For Eckler, providing him with RB1 numbers, Tyrod Taylor's running back was LaShawn McCoy for a couple of years. Tyrod peppered LaShawn McCoy in 2017 with 77 targets. And before that, he had 2+ seasons of 50 targets. I'm okay with, even if we give Austin Eckler 77 targets, I'm okay with that.
Right, yeah. A far cry from the 108 that he saw last year, but still,
right.
He's probably going to see with Melvin Gordon out of there. I mean, that's the reason Gordon came back is, Eckler was like the fantasy running back one, like him and CMC. And Eckler reminds me of like a CMC light. So that's why Gordon came back, was he just saw how good Eckler was doing. He's like, well, I better get back to work because I'm not going to have a job if I don't. But yeah, real quick, not to throw us off track, but the one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about Rivers, the former Chargers quarterback, was that if Cam Newton was already out of Carolina, I would say the Panthers would be my number one for Rivers because he's from North Carolina and he's got like 43 kids. So it's like you'd probably just want to move your family like closer to the grandparents and whatnot. So that would be my number one if Cam was actually out at this time. But he is still a Panther. Tyrod Taylor, though, going back, kind of circling back to the current Chargers quarterback, yeah, he's been productive, man. I don't understand where some of this hate comes from on Tyrod. He's been a valid fantasy producer when he's been given the opportunity. I mean, you can't really fault him for his Cleveland tenure because, Hugh Jackson was calling the shots, so that's kind of a recipe for disaster for any
right
under a Hugh Jackson regime. Speaking of fallen quarterbacks, it's nothing that Tyrod Taylor has ever done to tarnish his reputation. He has like this negative stigma, amongst a lot of the fantasy community. And me personally, I honestly don't get it, man. But I think he could absolutely make Austin Eckler, fantasy top 10 running back. I mean, Eckler's, top 4, top 5 based on your league settings. So it's while to expect a downtick in targets is completely reasonable. But at the same time, if Melvin Gordon's out of town and you're just handing this guy a fresh contract, well, it's pretty safe to say that he's going to get more than 132 carries too. So, I mean, the touches are going to be there no matter what, man. So some of this talk about, not being able to support a pass catching running back, I just don't get it, man.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that I want to see that scenario play out where Tyrod is the quarterback one going into the Chargers' first year with the new stadium. The new City of Champions stadium should be ready by 2020. I'm pretty sure at this point. Otherwise, they're a little bit behind on that. But, I mean, that's why I think that Brady makes a lot of sense going there too, because they're going to want to bring in people. I mean, they want to bring in, the stadium alone is going to bring in a lot of people. The LA fan base, as far as football, it's hit or miss, depending, you get a generation of football in LA, and then it's gone, and then it's gone for another decade. So I think they want to keep football there. They spent a lot of money on this new stadium, and Brady being there on the Chargers, what does that look like to you? I think that the one guy, now look, Eckler and Brady, you're loving that. You're loving that all around. There's no really downside to that. You need to rely on the run for Brady at this point in his career, and then he's going to dump it off. And if Eckler is the sole running back, you love it. If it's Gordon and Eckler somehow, I think you're still okay with that. We've seen Brady and the Patriots use 2 running backs. I think that if Brady were a Charger, you would probably see them doing something similar, trying to have him more of a game manager type role, which is why I think Keenan Allen, again, would be an awesome fantasy wide receiver where, look, you've been disappointed. And we just look at the play of Phillip Rivers last year and that makeup of the team in general for the Chargers. It just was pretty much a disaster for them for the majority of the season. And then Keenan Allen, you're frustrated at times. Mike Williams, you're frustrated at times if you're these owners because you want to see the target share and you want to see good balls delivered to these receivers. Well, look, if they can make the system work for Brady, I think Keenan Allen is back on your radar as a wide receiver 1 potential.
The fit, it makes a lot of sense. Of course, they did make that really weird trade with the Panthers, which I think they fleeced the Panthers. But in a scenario where you have who I consider the best route runner in the NFL, that's the type of precision that Tom Brady has relied on. He's never had like that downfield presence. I mean, Randy Moss, the year that they almost won every single game, that was really that, and the Brandon Cooks season were like the only times he's ever really had a dude that can just like stretch the field, unless you want to count like David Givens back in like, was that 05 or something.
Oh, wow. Good shout out. Good call there.
Reaching deep for that one, brother. But yeah, there's he's never been like that guy that's going to just bomb it down the field. And I mean, that's why Cooks only lasted a year. We saw that they had multiple times where they couldn't connect, and it's just, that's not Brady's game, man.
Well, I love the Patriots and them just being able to like, we don't want Brandon Cooks. Let's get discount Brandon Cooks. Let's get 40%.
Right, exactly. So they know what they're doing, man. Just basically they rented Cooks, and all they did was just basically change first round picks. So
right,
good on you guys. But that's why they're so good at what they do. But the aspect of having those guys down low, it'd be interesting to see. I don't know if they could afford Hunter Henry to bring him back if they did land a Brady, but your point of selling tickets in this new stadium, which looks amazing, by the way, some of these renderings and things I'm seeing, but it's absolutely dry.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They're going to have a pool surrounded by palm trees. I mean, there's going to be an outdoor pool right outside of the stadium, essentially. I mean, it's going to be hotels, casinos all around it. I mean, this is going to be huge for the city of Los Angeles. I mean, you have the Rams, who that's the show in town right now. I think they have, obviously, the juice still from the Super Bowl. This year was a letdown. So now the Chargers, it's been such a letdown for this team. And then you put them in that tiny, StubHub stadium that held like 35,000 people. Nobody was showing up to the games. I mean, it was a disaster. They need a resurgence. And Brady alone would do a lot for that franchise.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, you're putting them in a soccer stadium here as the rental for a couple years. Right. And like the reason nobody's coming to the games is because, the parking situation and all that's just absolutely absurd over in that area from what I have ascertained from a couple friends that live over there, and subsequently went to go see the Chargers play their favorite team. And that's how you get a recipe for the Chargers playing 16 away games the last 2 seasons. So that's what happens. You get that type of situation. But stadiums aside, I mean, them moving Okung out and bringing in Trey Turner, they're almost going to have to use that first round pick or, a second round pick on one of those awesome offensive tackles that this draft class is loaded with. So I think that would make it a little more appealing is, if they were to promise him, hey, listen, we're going to use one of our first 2 picks on a left tackle for you. So your final year doesn't have to, be you leaving in a coffin, but it's,
right.
That's the thing that's always been tricky with the Chargers. I was joking about it earlier, but they can't keep offensive linemen healthy, and that's got to be scary if you're a free agent quarterback trying to sign with the Chargers.
And that's a good point because Brady, we know that his conditioning is known. I mean, TB12. I mean, the brand itself is all about how Tom Brady has conditioned his body over the years, and someone like that who wants to get paid at this point in his career because look, he sacrificed enough for as far as he's concerned. He could have asked for a lot bigger contracts and gotten them. Not saying that he wasn't paid well throughout his career, but I think we know what we're saying here. And he wants that last paycheck, I mean, that's going to be a pretty significant, retirement bonus for Tom Brady. And that's what he's looking at right now. And speaking of bringing fans into the stadium, you mentioned it, Vegas. It's the first year in Vegas for the Raiders. And this is a team that's run first right now. John Gruden has established that. We know that what the Raiders want to do, they want to hit you in the mouth with Josh Jacobs. And that's what they're going to do. And putting Brady behind center there, I think would be arguably, I don't know about a better situation, but I think that protecting him wise, what the Chargers have set up going from last year, right? If we're looking at both teams from last year, what is set up right now? I think Brady might prefer this sort of style of offense. If you can just take out Derek Carr and put in Brady and set up that play action as the Raiders like to do, and we've seen Carr be effective with that. I don't want to, downgrade what Carr has done. He's nothing special at this point. We know that. But Brady being in that offense, I think can work. The one downside is I think that they don't have a lot of receivers to work with. But when has Brady ever had a lot of receivers to work with?
This is such a John Gruden and Mike Mayock move, isn't it? For them to go out and get Brady and then jettison Carr, who is only a few years removed from being an MVP candidate and getting a big contract extension. But it's interesting, man. I mean, that's why this whole thing is really interesting to me, is because we don't know what Tom Brady is thinking. I mean, does he want to go somewhere new and, have to get familiar with a whole new staff? I mean, part of that, I could see that being like his final challenge. And, maybe that's why he wants to get paid handsomely is, he knows how much work's going to go into this. It's probably more work than he's ever had to put in before. And, he's not getting any younger. So it's definitely appealing and interesting from that standpoint. And the style of offense, like you mentioned, it is right up his alley. I mean, it's kind of like a smash mouth, give it to Jacobs and, be a glorified game manager, but be able to make those smart decisions. So, whether they go and draft, like one of these Alabama receivers or somebody like that to give him, a solid target, in addition to what he has there in place already. I mean, they just gave Waller an extension. So they're set with him and Moreau at the tight end position. So it's, it'd be interesting, man. I feel like if he did go to Vegas, again, another nice new stadium, but they could also run some 2 tight end packages that Brady could bring over, that he remembers from the Gronk and Hernandez days. So it's not something I see as a realistic possibility, but I do think Vegas is a more realistic possibility. It's just weird because I'm not sure how those contract details are going to play out with Carr and, having the dead money there. But what's kind of your general opinion on that whole situation for that landing spot?
For Brady to Vegas?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about the 2 tight ends. I think that holds a lot of weight. When we talk about Foster Moreau being the second tight end there, who he's caught some touchdowns last year. He got some jump balls that looked really impressive in the red zone. He, took a lot from Waller where, we might have wanted those Waller touchdowns. Foster Moreau was getting them, and he was a sneaky DFS play on occasion. So I really like that from that standpoint. I'm trying to think of Tyrell Williams, and, I think he's about the same. I think last year what you saw in Tyrell is he was catching a touchdown every game, which was very helpful for his fantasy production when he was playing. Of course, he missed a lot of the season last year. So I think that he's about the same, Tyrell Williams. Yeah, I think they're going to add somebody at the wide receiver. I think that it's an okay turnout from a fantasy perspective. I don't know who really benefits from this. I think everyone, Josh Jacobs, he's probably about the same. I don't know how much more. I mean, obviously, if you think that Josh Jacobs has a lot of juice, and we know he does, then he's going to see progression next season. So that's going to happen with or without Tom Brady. I'm not that excited. I think I'm more excited from a fantasy perspective to get Tom Brady in LA, unless he just stays with the Patriots, which, let's be real, most likely scenario. Let's talk about Teddy Bridgewater and what I've seen a lot of Teddy Bridgewater. I think everyone at this point, all these quarterbacks on this list besides Dak Prescott, has been rumored to be going to Tampa Bay, including Marcus Mariota, who I've seen as that could be a possibility if Jameis Winston is in fact gone. So Teddy Bridgewater going to Tampa Bay would be interesting. I like Bridgewater in a lot of different situations. I really don't know where he fits at this point as a starter.
Yeah, the only place to me that would make any sense is if Brady didn't re-sign with New England. And to be honest with you, man, I once Josh McDaniels, didn't get any of those head coaching jobs. I mean, I pretty much considered Brady a done deal to just come back to Foxborough. So, but if that doesn't happen, I think Teddy Bridgewater going to New England is a perfect fit. Definitely. So it's interesting because they kind of play the same style game like Brady at his point in his career, and then Bridgewater just being, that starting caliber game manager that's going to kind of get things done. I mean, he's right there on that cusp, man. He's like a real fringe starter, but he would be probably one of the best 2 or 3 backups in the league if he was a backup. So I
would love to see him back up Ben Roethlisberger for a season.
Oh yeah, see, that would be tasty because there is absolutely nobody behind Big Ben that can lead an NFL offense.
Right. So it would be such a good fit, I feel like, for him to step into. Let's say if Roethlisberger goes down again, I mean, then you have a veteran presence. You don't have to rely on what they had to rely on last season, that quarterback position. I think that would be a great fit.
Yeah, I mean, even the other in Philadelphia, I mean, he could back up Wentz as well. I mean, Wentz has had enough of an injury history this far into his career now where I'm not going to say – I'm definitely not putting the injury prone label on him because I think that's extremely unfair. But at the same time, I feel like the Eagles are smart enough to know that. I mean, look what happened when they had invested in a backup quarterback. They had Nick Foles win the Super Bowl. So it's definitely interesting because somebody is going to pay up for Teddy Bridgewater, whether he is slotted in as a starter or a backup. He's right there on that cusp of, like I said, man, he's kind of an in-betweener, and it's tough to really, when you don't know how teams are valuing him, it's tough to know really who is a good fit and where is a good landing spot for him.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. One landing spot who I think is just a done deal is Dak Prescott. I mean, a lot of these free agents, not just quarterbacks, but in general, this free agency class, you can just assume that a lot of them are coming back. And I think Dak Prescott is one of those cases. So I think that he's back. I think it makes a lot of sense. They're going to want to pay him. I mean, it's already coming out that a deal is going to be put in place eventually here. The same thing we heard about Dak Prescott with the deal potentially in place is Ryan Tannehill for the Titans. Now, Ryan Tannehill earned himself the starting role on this team. I think that it makes the most sense for the Titans to just keep riding that because they had a great end or second half to the season once they benched Marcus Mariota in what has to be one of the most disappointing starts to a career at this point, when the ceiling was so high for Mariota. He had a great year. In the same year that Derek Carr was an MVP candidate, Marcus Mariota was having a fantastic season. Both of those players were kind of viewed as great seasons that just got cut short with injury. In the last game of the year, I believe both of those players went down with an injury. Both of those players, Marcus Mariota and Derek Carr, had such high ceilings. Now they're both really nowhere near that. And Ryan Tannehill is making the most of the opportunity. So I'm loving him in Tennessee. And let's talk a little bit about Marcus Mariota. And I think the only thing, well, not the only, there's many scenarios, but one scenario that makes sense to me is going to Chicago and challenging Mitch Trubisky. And I think that he kind of replicates the kind of player that Trubisky is. You know, they both can run, obviously. And you put Marcus Mariota with Matt Nagy, I think there could be something in play there. But, I mean, it's clear for Chicago that Mitch Trubisky is on his last leg here. Real quickly into his career, this is Trubisky's last chance. They already have talked about publicly that they would bring in a veteran quarterback to challenge.
Oh, yeah, that makes the most sense. And we talked about it a little bit on last week's episode of just how frustrated Matt Nagy and company were on the sidelines there. And I mean, you can't help but, see the frustration on their faces. And it's definitely a good move. We mentioned Bridgewater. He could be that guy that they bring in too. Honestly, if you are kind of more inclined to, give Trubisky another shot until he can fail, then I think that Mariota would be the guy that you bring in. If Nagy and company are sitting there saying, man, we have to do something because this obviously isn't working, and that it's not going to work, then I think Bridgewater is the guy that you bring in there, because you're only going to give that 2 or 3 games of, Mitch Trubisky, falling on his face and, it's the joke that he can't throw to his left. So it's
right.
That would be a scenario where we don't know how the coaching staff feels. I mean, we know how frustrated they've been on the sidelines at times, but it's really kind of like that internal temperature of, are they really done with Trubisky? Because, it makes sense to keep him there another year. But at the same time, if they are ready to move on, I think they would have to sign somebody like a Bridgewater over a Mariota, because Mariota's kind of coming off of a failure as well. But just real quick, I mean, how crazy is it to see, Ryan Tannehill get away from Adam Gase and just blow up, Kenyon Drake get away from Adam Gase and just blow up, and then Devontae Parker stay with no Adam Gase and just blow up. So seeing a common theme here.
Most definitely. Yeah. Poor Adam Gase, just getting dogged by fantasy analysts all over the place, man. But, Tannehill in Tennessee is awesome right now. You have to expect some sort of regression off of the pace he was at last year, but he's got some weapons there, and A.J. Brown is his wide receiver 1. I mean, we already know that. So you got Derrick Henry, who they finally let the reins go, and Mike Vrabel is coaching excellently. Really what the Titans have orchestrated is Patriots, Patriots light in Tennessee, with Vrabel at the helm there. So you got to love what you're seeing out of Tennessee and all of that sort of fantasy production that's going to take place. Let's talk about this Tampa situation. I know that both of us want to talk about this. We've been kind of just like putting this off, but really, and we talked about it in passing, and I think that's appropriate. I mean, I feel like every offseason, for the past 2 or 3 years, Tampa for me is just like a hot topic as far as fantasy production. Like last year, I wanted a couple running backs to go there. I thought it would have been great. This year, we were talking last week about David Johnson, what his potential is coming to coming to Tampa. Well, Jameis Winston could have played his last game as a Buccaneer. Best scenario for him, if he were to actually leave, would be to actually end up in Indianapolis, like we talked about for Phillip Rivers. And yeah, it's a great situation for any quarterback. If Teddy Bridgewater ends up on the Colts, it's a great situation for Teddy Bridgewater because of that offensive line. But let's talk about fantasy, because if Jameis ends up on the Colts, T.Y. Hilton's value spikes up. Marlon Mack is going to do his thing just like he would, it's a run-first team. I think that, if you're a Jameis owner, you can – if he ends up on somewhere like the Colts, I think his efficiency – you could finally see his efficiency increase because of the style of play.
Oh, yeah.
Jameis would be able to adapt. They still would be able to pass the ball. Jacoby Brissett still was passing the ball a lot, and at one point last season, early in the year, was led the league in touchdown passes. I mean, this guy was throwing at least 2 a week, talking about Jacoby Brissett for the first 6 or 7 games of the season. Jameis Winston would be fine in this situation.
Yeah, these guys couldn't be more opposite either. Like, Brissett is that guy that always comes out hot. And, the Colts always seem to get out to a lead, and then they kind of play conservative after that. Whereas Winston, it seems like they're always, he's digging himself out of his mistakes that he made earlier in the game.
Right.
So it's just weird because they couldn't be, more opposite. But yeah, I mean, some of those weapons that he had in Tampa, just, absolutely loaded, but no pass catching running back. And it's just so weird that, here we are, Winston and Mariota, number 1 and number 2 in the same draft class. And, here we are, and nobody really knows what's going on. We know that Mariota is out in Tennessee, but in Tampa, I mean, it's the same thing from day one. We don't know what we're going to be getting. I mean, it's, is he coming back to Tampa? I mean, they're still undecided. They've said as much. We haven't even had any clues as to the direction that Tampa's going. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, I think a lot of it's just going to come down to cap situation and money, where some of these guys are going to land. But it's definitely going to be interesting. That's for sure. I mean, I would love to see Winston go to the Colts, because I think Frank Reich, is slightly more conservative, like Bruce Arians, in contrast to his playing style, where he's a little more aggressive, a little more downfield. I think that Frank Reich is a phenomenal play caller, and I just love everything that the Colts have to offer. And I feel like having a stellar offensive line like the Colts do, that's really going to give Winston a lot more time to make some smarter decisions in the pocket. I don't think that's going to be an overnight thing. Obviously, would he have 5 years here now of him, still with questionable decision making? But it'll be interesting, man. That would definitely spike T.Y. his value for sure. Among some others.
Yeah, I want Jameis to stay put, because the Bruce Arians style, which I thought that Bruce Arians could come in and kind of ground Jameis, I was wrong, and I'll be open about that, because what Bruce Arians does is he wants to gun it downfield, and that just plays into what Jameis Winston wants to do. It's great for fantasy football. So we saw that. It's frustrating, but it ends up being very, very good for fantasy football. And that's where you really want him to stay. Like you said, man, no pass-catching running back for Jameis Winston and the Buccaneers, so he has to pepper his wide receivers with targets. So you like that from Mike Evans and Chris Godwin's standpoint always. I heard Teddy Bridgewater potentially going to the Buccaneers. You just hear all these rumors. Obviously, Bridgewater to the Buccaneers, it's a downgrade, in my opinion, for Evans and Godwin. That's no knock to Bridgewater. It's just he's not the gunslinging, kind of player that Jameis Winston is. Can he be that player? Yes. Is that the best way to win football games? Probably not. Not the way that the Buccaneers are built. And I think with Bridgewater, you get a more conservative, drive the ball downfield kind of guy, which – we know Jameis can do, but it's the turnovers, the turnovers kill you, and that's what he does consistently. That's why you love that from a fantasy perspective, because he's just going to keep coming back with those points. And you hate to see him go if you're a Jameis Winston owner in Dynasty right now. I'll say that.
Oh yeah, and I definitely am. But that's the thing, man. Is I saw the Bridgewater at Tampa, and to be honest, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. The Rivers I'd rather see Rivers to Tampa than Bridgewater. Right. To be honest with you, I mean, if we were going to rank him, but hey man, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So at the end of the day, wouldn't be surprised to see Brady back in New England. Tannehill and Dak are most likely re-signing. I think those are pretty much locks. And Winston going back to Tampa. I mean, really, Rivers and Bridgewater, I think, are and Mariota, of course. I think those are the only guys that I think are really going to be changing teams when everything's said and done. But it'll be interesting, man. There's still a little movement that could be had, if Cam does leave Carolina and, if the Bengals decide to move on from Andy Dalton. So it's, maybe that's a year away. I don't know, but it's probably going to be a lot of the same of what we're used to.
Well, definitely. And then, of course, Tua and Joe Burrow, they obviously have a lot to say with, where some of these quarterbacks end up and what they end up doing for fantasy football. But let's get into some of these players that saw either a spike in the right direction as far as, not only where they're going to go in fantasy drafts, but where they're going to go in the NFL draft, what these players have been gearing up for their entire lives. So let's start with Zach Moss, and I reference playerprofiler.com. If you have the pleasure, go over to playerprofiler.com, type in Zach Moss, and you're going to get a crying Jordan meme that you wouldn't believe. So, and it's all because of Zach Moss's combine. Moss was a guy out of Utah who right now we're thinking is going to be highly drafted. And when I say highly drafted, I'm thinking in the first 4 rounds. Zach Moss, before the combine, let's say, should have been drafted. I still think he has that value. He ran a 4.65 40. That's just a disappointing number. Any way you cut it. We know that the combine doesn't mean everything, and we also know that Zach Moss isn't that kind of player that's going to, have that getaway speed. But when you're drafting a running back and you want him to be your franchise running back, you really like to see the getaway speed from your running back. Zach Moss, I don't know if he has that right now, and a lot of NFL scouts have to question that too with the 4.65 40.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, man. I mean, that's the quickest way, no pun intended. I mean, that's the quickest way to tank your stock these days is just running a slow 40. I mean, that's what a lot of the guys that I noted, I mean, that's, except quarterbacks, of course. I mean, that's where they take the biggest hit is, in the speed measurements and, and that's where the guys pop eyeballs out of people's heads is, oh my gosh, this dude ran how fast? And it's, so it was super disappointing because I'm with you, man. Zach Moss was a guy that before all the testing, when they were doing some of the media interviews and, just really, really like that kid a lot, man, and was really hoping that he would test out a little bit better. So disappointing to see that happen, but we all know that the combine is not the end of the world. So he could still be a great fit for somebody. I mean, we all know how dependent scheme is. So, as long as he gets in the right fit, I mean, he could definitely still blossom into a successful NFL running back.
Well, I'll kind of compare him to Devin Singletary, who we both know I'm high on. If Devin Singletary ended up not in Buffalo, not right behind Frank Gore, who knows with Singletary? What if Singletary ended up on, the Vikings and, was behind Alexander Madison and Dalvin Cook, and just got one shot. And then that was it. Devin Singletary obviously had a lot of time and in the great system, downhill style of runner that Zach Moss is. Like if Zach Moss ended up in Buffalo and you replace Singletary with Moss, yeah, I like Zach Moss's situation a lot, right? But he's a downhill runner, kind of like Singletary, but without the pass catching ability. I think that he certainly can do that. I can kind of compare him to Royce Freeman in that way. right? Where he can be like the goal line back. He's a downhill runner, and he's a bigger, kind of guy, stocky as well, around 5'9", 5'10", but can also catch the ball. Zach Moss isn't quite there. I think that he has that capability, and in the right system, he can be good, but I think that he's going to take a dip in the draft, and he could end up in that fourth-ish round.
Yeah, I mean, he started off the whole process, undervalued.
Right.
And, I mean, he really didn't do anything, to boost his value. So I think he's still flying under the radar, and, he's could definitely be like one of these, late-round running backs that just ends up having a great career. I mean, we've seen it, as far back as, like Terrell Davis.
Right.
It's definitely the potential. And I just saw the player profiler, the crying Jordan for Zach Moss. It's hilarious.
Oh man, it's bad. It's painful right now, especially, all the people that are riding Zach Moss before the combine that have to kind of eat that and, take it like, okay, all right. But it's not the end all be all at all. It's not it, for Zach Moss. There is still, it's all about the situation at the end of the day. You would like to see that that burst score improve, that 40 improve, but on the other end of the spectrum, someone who boosted their stature going into the NFL draft is Denzel Mims out of Baylor. And I'm really excited about Denzel Mims because he fits that prototypical wide receiver one, and he can fly. He can outright fly. You love to see that, and if you watch any tape on Denzel Mims, you know that he can go up and get that 50-50 ball. He can run the slant route. I think that at the NFL level, the way the rules are, you don't have to worry about him being not physical, which, he is. He's not like the most physical. I think, if you want to talk about a physical receiver, Anquan Bolden, Des Bryant, I don't think he's that guy. But I also think that his body at 6'3", 207, with, the catch radius that he has, with the burst that he has, all of those combined can make Denzel Mims a very productive wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's a few guys that really impressed me, and he was definitely one of them. Both him and Justin Jefferson that you noted, their stock's definitely pointing way up. So nice to see that those guys showed out. Those were guys that I was very interested to kind of see how they would test out at the combine, and they definitely didn't disappoint. I don't know how you feel about Jalen Reagor, but I was definitely not as high as the field on him, and I feel like he's kind of fallen back a little bit since the combine now, and his stock's definitely down after that subpar combine performance, and again the 40. But that's that I don't know how you feel about him, but definitely Mims arrow pointing up. Jefferson ever since his performance in the college football playoff, it continues to soar up Dynasty draft boards, and Reagor definitely took a hit this weekend. Those are kind of like my main notes at the receiver position.
Oh, I think if Reagor has taken a hit, then he's certainly someone to note as getting fantastic value on, because I do like Jalen Reagor a good bit based on his tape, based on his measurables. He's also he's built like we see Deebo Samuel, like we see these guys that are kind of stockier guys that have great burst and can kind of play like a running back, kind of like Golden Tate. He's kind of that guy for me.
Yeah, and Reagor returned punts and whatnot too, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
those guys. That comparison to Deebo is fantastic, because that's kind of where Deebo was at this time last year. Was not the quickest guy, but I mean, we saw what he ended up doing, and definitely some comparison there. I can understand the similarities. So
what are we seeing, Josh? I mean, we talked about it last week with Hollywood Brown. I mean, we're seeing these guys have success that are maybe undersized, not the traditional wide receiver one, but man, can they fly. And when they have the ball, especially with rules in place like the NFL, it's a passing league. You don't have to be the most physical receiver. If you have speed and you can make a lot of plays underneath, they have to respect that. And then all of a sudden you're beat. I think Henry Ruggs has that kind of ability, and I'm excited for him. If he ends up in a great situation, you're happy for fantasy.
When I look at Ruggs, at least with Rieger, like for example, like his comparison on player profilers like Christian Kirk. So a great current example. And I get that because I have him. I personally feel like the ceiling is higher on Rieger than Ruggs. And then I also like Mims, going in, and like his comparison is, Chris Godwin. And my God, everybody was high on Godwin last year, including myself. And it seemed like no matter what draft I was in, I couldn't get him in any of my dynasty leagues, get me any Godwin, and Mims could definitely be, a Chris Godwin clone. I think that's a pretty solid comparison. With a lot of these guys, we see that speed kind of makes the difference in kind of their relative value going in. And, real quick, I won't talk too much on the tight end position, but I mean, we saw, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, but Albert O there from Mizzou, his stock's pointing way up. He was definitely the talk of the tight end position with his speed. He was running similar times to Rieger, who we were just talking about.
Right.
And so, his stock is way up. This class isn't that great, but, Jared Pinkney, who I think a lot of people kind of had labeled as, the best number one. I mean, he came out and just looked so slow, and his stock took a hit. So, I mean, the exact opposite. So you kind of see those values fluctuate based on speed. And
going back to Albert Okwuegbunam. Whoa, I went for it, guys. And please do not, hate on me if I did not get that right. Okwuegbunam. Look, if this guy who ran a 4.49 40 at the combine, who is obviously a gifted athlete at 6'6", 258, let's say the Patriots, they just signed Tom Brady, to a huge final year, and they draft this guy. I would love that story. Just getting Tom Brady a weapon like that, again, at the tight end position, Gronk number 2. I mean, let's go.
Right.
Like, come on. I'm in for that.
Oh yeah, major potential there, man, for sure.
Anybody else that really you're excited about? I mean, from the combine or just in general from this class at any position?
Well, from a fantasy, there were a lot of guys that impressed me. Offensive line and defensive guys that, unless you're in an IDP, really don't make a lot of sense for us to talk about on our show. But one thing I will say, just as a blanket statement, is I think that a lot of people are sleeping on some of these running backs, man. I get that ETN and, a couple guys, stayed back and, returning for their senior seasons. And, I don't think that watered down the class to the level that people think it did. We have something to look forward to next year, obviously, with those guys, but it's, this running back class is, I mean, if you're sitting at the back end of your dynasty league, and you have like a later first round pick, if you're a team that doesn't necessarily, if you're set at receiver and you really don't need, to add another rookie receiver, I mean, some of these young running backs are going to be waiting there for you at the end of the first round. And I mean, I think you're going to get some really good value there.
I love it, man. Yeah, no, you're completely right. I think that a lot of these, Etienne obviously not coming out to be drafted into the NFL. I mean, it took the wind out of the sails for how, this running back class was shaping up. But there's definitely value to be had. I think that going into last season when we were looking at the class, we weren't that excited about it. I mean, it was, it was Miles Sanders, David Montgomery. We were looking at players like that, and it was really all situation dependent. It didn't feel like there was a clear number one, where at least this year, I think that, there are, Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers, those two guys, are pretty good running backs. Jonathan Taylor at this point, we don't want to paint the picture with any broad strokes here, but Jonathan Taylor, I think can be that Ezekiel Elliott type guy if he gets into, let's say that like the Colts, for instance, they have this great offensive line that they're building. What if they could land somebody like Jonathan Taylor without Marlon Mack being in the picture, in a dream scenario? Trying to think of other teams that are building up right now where he could just be plugged in and, just like Josh Jacobs was last year, where we thought maybe David Montgomery was going to have that, sort of role, but we saw Josh Jacobs get put into the perfect scenario and have such a good, season for a fantasy perspective. I think that Jonathan Taylor can be that kind of guy. And I think we could be excited about him, so he's definitely the guy who I'm looking at like, okay, where is he going to go? And then it's all up, to the fantasy gods from there.
We're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the landing spot's going to dictate a lot of these guys. So pretty excited to kind of see, we're not that far away now. Combine is in the rearview mirror and it's full steam ahead towards draft season.
Do follow me on Twitter at FFProfessorST3. Josh, where can they find you on Twitter, my friend?
Yeah, I'm going to be at Josh Daly 72. That's Dalley.
My guy. And of course, we're going to come at you next week. Josh, I was thinking, we haven't had a guest just yet. It's been me and you rocking the show. Traditionally, the hot take is a trio with a guest on the other end. I think we're going to have our first guest next week. Should be a good one. I have a couple people in mind. I've started that conversation. So we're going to get into the running backs for free agents. I think it's going to be a hell of a show. We'll lead off talking a little bit more in depth about Austin Eckler and talk about some of these free agents, also some trade potential. We have to mention the David Johnson and Melvin Gordon scenarios because it's likely that two very relevant running backs, first-round picks of yesteryear, are going to be on the move. So it's exciting times. I love this time of year when it comes to fantasy football. This is the time we gear up for the season. A lot of things happening at this time of year. And this is really where, guys like me and Josh, we thrive in this time of year for fantasy football because this is where it starts, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, we might have some more juicy, trade or contract extension news breaking that we get to talk about next week.
That's right. Yeah. On behalf of Josh Daly, my name is Steven Tironi. Thanks for listening to the Hot Take Podcast. We will see you next week.